Imagine a powerful billionaire, a man who put the world on wheels, who decides to build a perfect city in the heart of the wildest jungle. But it didn't quite happen that way. There's a story that resonates as a warning, a tale of boundless ambition and an industrial dream that collided head on with the indomitable force of nature and the very essence of humanity. It is the story of Fordlandia, a name that evokes images of a modern utopia, but which in reality has become the symbol of a colossal failure. Henry Ford, the automotive giant, the man who invented the assembly line and made the car accessible to everyone, had a vision, and this vision took him straight into the green pulsating heart of the Amazon, with the idea of building not just a factory but a true American model city, a beacon of civilization and productivity in a place where nature reigns supreme. What followed was an unprecedented social and economic experiment, an epic that turned into a drama, and that leaves us today with a handful of ruins and a question. What happens when the unstoppable logic of industry meets the implacable power of the jungle? It is 1928. Henry Ford, with his world dominating Ford Motor Company, was not just an industrialist, he was a man convinced that his vision of efficiency could improve every aspect of human life. He imagined a world where everything was standardized, predictable, and productive. But there was a problem. For his cars, he needed rubber. Lots of it. And at that time, rubber was controlled almost entirely by the British Empire, which had a monopoly on plantations in Asia. Ford, as a good American, hated depending on others for such a vital resource. If I want rubber, he thought, I'll make it myself. And so his gaze fell on the Brazilian Amazon, the birthplace of the rubber tree. Brazil, eager to attract foreign investment, offered Ford a huge area, some 2.5 million acres of virgin land, nearly the size of Connecticut, on the banks of the Tapajos River, a tributary of the Amazon River. The price, symbolic, the promise, creating an industrial hub that would bring progress and jobs. Ford's vision was not just a plantation, but a full fledged city, an oasis of American modernity in the midst of one of the most inaccessible rainforests on the planet. This would be no mere outpost, but a model city, a shining example of the American way of life, faithfully replicated in every detail, from food to moral values to work habits. The ultimate goal was clear: to obtain an independent and abundant supply of natural rubber for its factories, freeing itself forever from the shackles of foreign monopolies. What was born was something extraordinary, at least on paper. Fordlandia was designed to be an ideal city, equipped with every comfort an American worker could desire: prefabricated houses, state of the art hospitals with modern healthcare facilities, schools for workers' children, an efficient water and sewerage system. There was even a golf course, a swimming pool, and a ballroom. At the center of it all, of course, was the rubber processing plant, an engineering marvel that was supposed to turn tree latex into valuable tires. The entire system was a perfect copy of the Taylorist management model that Ford had perfected in Detroit: rigid work rhythms, precise schedules, mandatory uniforms, and rules of conduct as rigid as steel. In Fordlandia, alcohol was forbidden, as was smoking and even political discussions. It was rural Puritan America transplanted into the jungle. But this industrial dream almost immediately collided with a very different reality. The stark contrast between the sterile, orderly factories of Detroit and the lush, chaotic jungle of the Amazon was stark. Here, nature wasn't an obstacle to be tamed, but a vital force that engulfed everything. American engineers arrived with their ironclad logic, convinced that what worked in Michigan would work anywhere. But the jungle had its own laws, far older and more ruthless than any timetable. They tried to impose an alien lifestyle. Brazilian workers, accustomed to more flexible rhythms of life and work, found themselves forced to eat hamburgers and oats instead of rice and beans, to dance American group dances, and to give up their beloved cachaça. These impositions, which in Ford's eyes were synonymous with progress and good morality, were perceived by local workers as a profound humiliation, a total contempt for their traditions and culture. Many of them came from remote villages and were uprooted from their land, catapulted into a world they did not understand and that did not respect them. It wasn't just the language that was at odds, but the entire way of thinking and living. This lack of cultural understanding was the first enormous crack in the foundations of Ford's dream. The problems were not limited to cultural aspects, they manifested themselves everywhere, and with unexpected virulence. First, the choice of land was disastrous. Rubber experts had warned Ford that the type of rubber tree he intended to grow, Hevea brasiliensis, grew best scattered throughout the forest, not in dense monocultures. But Ford, with his unbearable confidence in his own omniscience, ignored these warnings. He planted thousands upon thousands of rubber trees, all of the same species, side by side, on soil that moreover was often rocky and not particularly fertile for that crop. It was a breeding ground for pests and diseases. Fungi like South American leaf blight spread rapidly, relentlessly decimating the crops. Within a few years, vast tracts of land once used for rubber production were transformed into graveyards of dead trees. The jungle didn't just boycott the plantations, it was a constant presence, a living green wall that made everything difficult. The humid and suffocating heat, the insects, the tropical diseases, the poisonous snakes, all contributed to making the life of American workers and managers a real hell. Machinery rusted, roads were swallowed up by vegetation in a matter of weeks if not constantly maintained. Logistics were a nightmare. Getting materials and supplies into remote Fordlandia was a Herculean undertaking. Everything had to arrive by ship upriver on a journey that could take weeks. Spare parts arrived too late, food spoiled, and communications were precarious. Nature didn't just resist, it attacked, methodically, day after day. Precarious working conditions, aggravated by the paternalistic and authoritarian management of American administrators, who often did not speak Portuguese and isolated themselves from the rest of the population, generated growing frustration. The wages, although relatively good for the region, did not compensate for the loss of freedom and the constant feeling of being treated like children. Riots were inevitable. The most famous was the Breaking Pots riots of 1930, when workers rebelled against substandard food and humiliating rules, destroying the cafeteria and other facilities. There were also incidents of sabotage, acts of passive resistance, and desertions. Workers fled into the jungle, preferring a harder but freer life. Despite all the efforts, the millions of dollars spent, and the tenacity typical of Henry Ford, Fordlandia was a failure on all fronts. Rubber production was meager, of inferior quality, and not enough to cover even a fraction of Ford's needs. The dream of self sufficiency had turned out to be a nightmare, and ironically, just as Fordlandia was struggling, technology was moving rapidly. World War II brought increasing demand for rubber and at the same time accelerated the development of synthetic rubber, a much cheaper and more reliable solution than any Amazonian plantation. In 1945, Henry Ford, now elderly and ailing, passed the reins of his company to his grandson, Henry Ford II. One of the new boss's first decisions was to divest himself of Fordlandia. The entire operation was sold to the Brazilian government for a paltry sum, $250,000, a tiny fraction of the $20 million, the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars today, that had been invested. It was the end of an era, the end of a dream. The Americans left, leaving behind a ghost town. Today, Fordlandia is a ghostly place, a silent warning. The prefabricated American woodhouses are rotting, the buildings are crumbling, and vegetation has begun to reclaim every corner. The diseased rubber trees continue to bear witness to the lost battle. The jungle, with its slow and inexorable progression, has swallowed up the roads, the factories, and the dreams. It is a powerful ruin, a vivid image of how human ambition, if not accompanied by humility and respect for its surroundings, can collide with a force much greater than itself. Fordlandia is a legacy not only of dead trees and crumbling structures, but also a symbol of the profound disconnect between the relentless logic of industry and the complexity of natural ecosystems and human cultures. It reminds us that you cannot impose a vision without understanding the context, and that nature in the end always finds a way to take back what belongs to it. If this story of broken dreams and lessons learned has intrigued you, don't miss our next video on another incredible historical failure.